Tiara Griffin, draped in a floor-length black silk gown that cost more than her family's old house, stepped onto the mezzanine of the Seoul Grand Ballroom with a predator's grace. Her target, the man at the center of the room, surrounded by bodyguards and bowing elites. Tiara stopped at the gilded railing, her thumb hovering over a red button on her phone that would trigger a $1.2 billion wipeout of his offshore accounts. She looked down at the man who had been the ghost in her nightmares for 7 years.
Excuse me, Chairman.
"Excuse me, Chairman," she said, her voice cutting through the classical music like a blade. Chairman Kang Lee, the most feared man in the Korean underworld, looked up at the woman who had just publicly interrupted his toast and felt the floor fall away. It wasn't the threat in her voice that stopped his heart, it was the way she tilted her head, the specific fire in her deep brown eyes, and the faint, elegant scar on her collarbone that he had seen once before, under much darker circumstances. 7 years ago, a girl in a rainy alley had saved his life without knowing his name. Now, she was standing in front of him as the ghost, the corporate assassin currently holding his empire's throat. "I believe you're in my seat," Tiara said, her expression cold and dominant. Kang's lips curved into a dangerous, obsessed smile. "Is that so?" "Very," she replied, unflinching. "So either sign the divestment papers or watch your legacy turn to ash. I have a plane to catch." 7 years of grief, calculated rage, and a thirst for justice crystallized into one question. How did the girl who gave him life become the woman destined to take it? If you're wondering how a rainy night rescue, a midnight betrayal, and a house set on fire led to this moment, where a corporate queen just cornered Seoul's deadliest dragon, hit that subscribe button, because this story is about to burn. 7 years ago, Tiara Griffin was 21 years old and had no idea she was about to save a monster. She was working 2 jobs to keep her family afloat when the sky opened up over the Seoul backstreets. Her father, a man whose only sin was being too kind to the wrong people, had always told her that a griffin never looks away from someone in pain. "Tiara, help is a choice, not a chore," he'd say. That night, as she tripped over a bleeding body in the dark, she made that choice. She didn't see the tailored suit ruined by road rash or the expensive watch shattered on the pavement. She only saw a man who was barely breathing. "Hold on," she whispered, tearing her own shirt to plug the wound in his side. "I've got you." She had no way of knowing that by saving the stranger in the rain, she was signing her family's death warrant. The rain did not just fall. It screamed against the pavement, drowning out the sounds of the city. Tiara pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders, her boots splashing through deep puddles as she took the shortcut through the narrow alley behind the grocery store. She was exhausted from a double shift, her mind fixed only on her small, warm bed. Then, she saw him. A shadow slumped against a wall of damp bricks. At first, she thought it was just a pile of discarded rags, but then the shadow moved. A low, ragged groan cut through the sound of the downpour. Tiara stopped, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "A griffin never looks away from someone in pain." She stepped closer, the dim light of a flickering street lamp revealing a man. He was dressed in a suit that looked more expensive than everything she owned, but it was torn and soaked in dark, spreading crimson. He was pale, ghostly pale, and his breath came in short, jagged gasps. As she knelt beside him, his eyes fluttered open. They were narrow, intense, and filled with a wild, flickering light before they rolled back. "Hey, stay with me!" Tiara cried, her hands shaking as she touched his side. Her fingers came away warm and sticky. He didn't answer in English. Instead, he began to mutter under his breath, a string of hurried, melodic words she didn't recognize. It was Korean, spoken with a desperate, shaky urgency. He sounded like he was giving an order, or perhaps saying a prayer. Tiara knew she should call for help, but something stopped her. In this part of the city, an expensive man bleeding in an alley usually meant people with guns were not far behind. If she left him, he would die. If she called the police, the people who did this might find him first. With a strength she didn't know she had, she draped his heavy arm over her shoulders. He groaned, his head falling against her neck, his skin burning with a sudden fever. Step by agonizing step, she dragged him out of the shadows and toward her nearby apartment building. She prayed the hallways were empty. Once inside her tiny studio, she eased him onto her small sofa. The room smelled of old wood and her vanilla candles, a sharp contrast to the metallic scent of blood now filling the air. She moved with frantic speed, grabbing her first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. She had to cut away the fine silk of his shirt. Beneath, the wound was deep and angry. As she cleaned the jagged cut, the man gripped her wrist. His hand was like an iron vice, his strength terrifying even in his weakened state. He stared up at her, his dark eyes unfocused but piercing. He whispered a single word in that same foreign tongue, his voice low and gravelly. He looked at her not as a stranger, but as if she were the only solid thing left in a crumbling world. Tiara didn't pull away. She just squeezed his hand back, whispering that he was safe, unaware that by keeping him alive, she was inviting a storm into her life that would burn everything she loved to the ground. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the air was still heavy and cold. Tiara woke up on the hard floor next to the sofa. She had barely slept, checking the stranger's fever every hour. She sat up and blinked, expecting to see the man still struggling to breathe. Instead, the sofa was empty. The small apartment was silent, the blankets were folded neatly, and the bloody rags she had used to clean his wounds were gone. For a moment, Tiara thought she had dreamed the entire night. Then she noticed something shimmering on her small wooden dining table. She walked over and picked up a heavy object. It was a solid gold crest, shaped like a soaring dragon. It felt cold and expensive in her palm. The detail was incredible. Every scale on the dragon looked sharp enough to cut. This was not the kind of thing a normal person carried. It was a symbol of power, a key to a world she didn't belong to. Underneath the gold crest was a small piece of paper. There were only 5 words written in a sharp, elegant hand. "I will return for you." Tiara's heart did a strange somersault. She looked at the door, then back at the golden dragon. She should have felt relieved that he was gone. Having a man like that in her home was dangerous. But instead, she felt a lingering sense of worry. Who was he really? And what kind of trouble was he running from? She hid the crest inside an old jewelry box at the back of her closet. She told herself she would forget about him. She went about her day, heading to her shift at the cafe, but her mind kept drifting back to the way he had looked at her before he vanished. He hadn't looked at her like a stranger. He had looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. When she returned home that evening, her father was sitting at the table, looking through the mail. He smiled at her, his face kind and tired. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Tiara," he joked. She forced a smile and hugged him, burying her face in his shoulder. She wanted to tell him about the man in the alley. She wanted to show him the gold dragon, but something told her to keep quiet. She didn't want to bring that dark, dangerous world into her father's peaceful life. As she cooked dinner, she kept glancing at the closet where the gold crest was hidden. The stranger had promised to return, and part of her believed him. She didn't know that his promise was actually a warning. She didn't know that the gold dragon she was hiding was a mark that would soon bring her entire world crashing down in flames. For now, it was just a beautiful secret, a golden debt waiting to be paid. The smell of smoke woke her before the heat did. It was a thick, choking scent that filled her lungs and made her eyes sting. Tiara scrambled out of bed, her heart racing. At first, she thought it was just a dream, but then she heard the roar. It was a deep, hungry sound, like a monster devouring everything in its path. "Dad!" she screamed, rushing into the small hallway. The air was orange and swirling with ash. Flames were licking at the edges of the front door, crawling up the wallpaper like glowing spiders. She reached for her father's room, but a wall of heat pushed her back. The hallway was collapsing. She called his name again and again, her voice breaking, but the only answer was the terrifying crackle of wood snapping in the heat. The fire was moving too fast. It wasn't a normal fire. It smelled like chemicals, sharp and intentional. Tiara stumbled back into her room, the floorboards burning her bare feet. She grabbed the one thing she had hidden away, the gold dragon crest. As she climbed out of the window onto the narrow fire escape, the glass shattered behind her and a gout of flame chased her into the cold night air. She collapsed on the wet pavement of the alley across the street, gasping for breath. She watched as the only home she had ever known turned into a giant torch. Neighbors were screaming and sirens wailed in the distance, but Tiara couldn't move. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the jewelry box. Slowly, she opened it. Inside, the gold dragon crest stared back at her. In the bright, flickering light of the fire, the dragon looked evil. Its golden eyes seemed to mock her. She remembered the stranger's pale face and his whispered promise. She remembered the way he had looked at her like she was his savior. Suddenly, the truth hit her like a physical blow. The fire hadn't started by accident. This was the return he had promised. By saving a man from a world of blood and secrets, she had brought that world right to her doorstep. She had been kind to a monster, and in return, the monster had taken her father, her home, and her future. She clutched the cold metal of the crest until it bruised her palm. The tears on her face dried instantly from the heat of the burning building. She wasn't the soft, helpful girl from the rainy alley anymore. That girl had died in the fire. Looking at the golden dragon, she felt a new, icy feeling take over her heart. It was a cold, quiet rage. The man she saved had destroyed her family, but he made a mistake. He left her alive. As the roof of her house fell in with a final booming crash, Tiara made a promise to the dragon in her hand. She would find him, and she would make him lose everything, just like she had. Tiara did not stay to watch the ashes cool. With no home and no family left, she took the only thing she had and hopped on a plane to America. She landed in New York City with nothing but a small suitcase and the gold dragon crest. For weeks, she slept in a crowded shelter, keeping the jewelry box tucked under her pillow. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the orange flames. Every time she touched the gold dragon, she felt the cold weight of her promise. One afternoon, she walked into a high-end pawn shop in Manhattan. The air inside smelled like old dust and expensive cigars. The owner, an old man with thick glasses, gasped when she placed the gold crest on the velvet counter. He didn't ask where she got it, and she didn't offer an explanation. He handed her a check with more zeros than she had ever seen in her life. It was enough to change everything. Tiara used that money like a weapon. She enrolled in the best university, studying business and law during the day, and working on her computer until the sun came up. She didn't make friends. She didn't go to parties. She spent every waking second learning how to move money, how to find secrets, and how to break companies apart from the inside. She became a master of the digital world, a place where she could be invisible. Years passed, and the soft, helpful girl from the alley was gone for good. In her place was a woman who was as sharp as a diamond and just as hard. In the business world, people began to whisper about a new force, They called her the Ghost. She was the one who appeared out of nowhere to buy up a company's debt before they even knew they were in trouble. She was the one who could find the tiny mistake in a contract that would ruin a billionaire. She moved from one victory to another, building a massive fortune of her own. But she wasn't doing it for the fancy cars or the expensive clothes. She lived in a sleek, cold apartment that felt more like a command center than a home. Every dollar she earned was just another brick in the wall she was building to protect herself. Every company she took over was practice for the big one. By the end of the 7th year, Tiara was no longer a victim hiding in a shelter. She was a legend. She had the power, the money, and the skills to face the man who had destroyed her life. She pulled the last file she needed onto her screen, the Kang Corporation. She looked at the photo of Chairman Kang Lee, the man she had once saved. He looked older, colder, and more powerful than before. Tiara felt a familiar chill in her heart, but she didn't flinch. She had spent 7 years forging herself into a weapon, and now it was finally time to strike. Chairman Kang Lee sat in his leather chair on the top floor of the Kang Tower, staring out at the sparkling lights of Seoul. To the rest of the world, he was the most powerful man in the country. He was untouchable, a king who ruled an empire built on steel, ships, and secrets. His suits were custom-made, his cars were faster than lightning, and a single nod from him could ruin a man's life. But as the clock struck midnight, the office felt like a giant, cold cage. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small, frayed piece of black fabric. It was a scrap from a simple cotton shirt stained with old, dried blood, his own blood. He closed his eyes and could almost hear the sound of the rain screaming against the pavement. He could still feel the gentle touch of the girl who had saved him in that dark alley 7 years ago. She had been so small and so brave. She hadn't known his name or his power. She had only seen a man who was hurting. "Where are you?" he whispered to the empty room. For 7 years, Kang had been a man obsessed. He had spent millions of dollars hiring private investigators and hackers to find the girl from the rain. He had searched every hospital record and every apartment list in the city. He didn't just want to thank her, he wanted to keep her. She was the only person who had ever looked at him with kindness instead of fear. In his world of lies and shadows, she was the only thing that felt real. But every search ended in a dead end. It was as if she had vanished into the mist. His advisors told him to let it go. They reminded him that he was the chairman now, and that a leader shouldn't be distracted by a ghost. Kang would just glare at them until they turned pale and left the room. They didn't understand that his throne felt hollow without her. He had all the money in the world, but he couldn't buy the way she had made him feel safe in the middle of a storm. He stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. His reflection showed a man with a sharp jawline and eyes that had seen too much violence. He looked like a predator, but inside he felt like he was still waiting in that alley for her to come back. He didn't know that his own family had been the ones to chase her away. He didn't know that his search was about to end in a way he never expected. A red light flickered on his computer screen. It was a notification that a massive amount of company stock was being moved by an unknown buyer. Someone was attacking his empire, and they were doing it with terrifying speed. Kang's eyes narrowed, and his cold, ruthless expression returned. He didn't know that the ghost attacking his company was the same angel he had been searching for. The war was starting, and for the first time in years, the chairman felt truly alive. The wheels of the private jet touched the runway at Incheon Airport with a soft thud. Tiara stared out the window at the gray, misty morning of Seoul. It had been 7 long years since she had fled this city in the middle of the night, covered in soot and tears. Back then, she was a girl with no name and no hope. Today, she was returning as a storm. She stepped off the plane wearing a sharp, deep navy suit and dark sunglasses that hid the fire in her eyes. Her posture was perfect, and her face was like a mask of cold stone. In her hand, she clutched a sleek silver briefcase. She wasn't using the name Tiara Griffin. On her passport, she was Ms. Vane, a top-level corporate consultant from New York. To the secret world of billionaires and bankers, she was simply the ghost. As her black car drove through the busy streets of the city, Tiara didn't look at the beautiful palaces or the modern shops. Instead, she watched the tall glass building of the Kang Tower rising in the distance like a giant dragon made of steel. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but it wasn't from fear. It was from the excitement of the hunt. "The target is ready," her assistant whispered from the front seat, tapping on a tablet. "The Kang Corporation stocks are already starting to shake. People are hearing rumors that a new player is in town." Tiara nodded slowly. She had spent months preparing for this moment. She had found the weak spots in Kang's shipping deals and the tiny cracks in his bank accounts. She was hired by a group of rival businessmen who wanted to see the chairman fall, but they didn't know her real reason. They thought she was doing it for the money. They had no idea she was doing it for the ashes. Every move she made was calculated. By lunch, she had successfully blocked a major deal that Kang Lee was counting on. By the afternoon, the news was reporting a sudden drop in the Kang family's fortune. She was sinking his empire, bit by bit, from a quiet hotel room overlooking the city. She felt a cold sense of victory as she watched the red numbers drop on her screen. She knew that Kang Lee would be furious. He would be searching for the person responsible for this attack. He would be looking for the ghost, a faceless enemy he couldn't touch. Tiara leaned back and took a slow sip of her tea. She wanted him to feel the walls closing in. She wanted him to wonder who was brave enough to challenge the King of Seoul. "Let him search," she whispered to the empty room. "Let him realize that some debts can't be paid with gold." She wasn't just here to win a business war. She was here to make sure that when the chairman finally saw her face, he would realize that the girl he had destroyed had come back to finish him. The ghost had arrived, and the hunt was finally on. The grand ballroom of the Seoul Palace Hotel was a sea of sparkling diamonds, expensive perfumes, and soft piano music. Tiara stood on the mezzanine balcony looking down at the crowd. She looked every bit the powerful woman the world called the Ghost. Her black silk dress flowed around her like ink, and her hair was styled in perfect, elegant waves. In her hand, she gripped her phone, her thumb resting just above the button that would send the Kang Corporation into a tailspin. She had been in the city for days, pulling strings and breaking deals, but she had stayed in the shadows. Tonight was different. Tonight she was stepping out. She scanned the room, looking for the man who sat on the throne she was about to burn. Then the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall swung open. A sudden silence washed over the room, as if the air itself had been sucked out. The crowd parted like a retreating tide, and a man walked in. He was surrounded by a wall of sharp-dressed bodyguards, but he didn't need them to look dangerous. He moved with a slow, predatory grace that made everyone else in the room look small. Tiara's breath caught in her throat. She leaned against the cold marble railing, her heart beginning to pound so hard it hurt. As the man stepped under the giant crystal chandelier, the light hit his face. It was him. The sharp jawline, the pale skin, and the intense, narrow eyes were unmistakable. Even after 7 years, she recognized the way he carried his shoulders and the cold, emotionless mask he wore. But there was something else. A small, faint scar near his temple that she had cleaned with her own hands in a dirty, rain-soaked alley. Tiara felt the world tilt. Her knees went weak and she had to grab the railing to keep from falling. The stranger she had saved, the man she had hidden in her tiny apartment and fed with her last bit of soup, was not a low-level thug. He was Chairman Kang Lee. He was the most feared man in Seoul. He was the devil who owned the crest she had found in the ashes of her home. She stared down at him, her mind spinning with 1,000 terrible thoughts. She had spent 7 years hating a faceless monster, only to realize she was the one who had kept that monster alive. If she had just walked away that night, her father might still be here. If she had been a little less kind, her house wouldn't have burned. Down on the floor, as if he could feel her gaze, Kang Lee stopped walking. He turned his head slowly, his eyes sweeping across the balcony until they landed directly on her. The air between them seemed to crackle. For a heartbeat, the ruthless chairman froze. His cold expression shattered, replaced with a look of pure dark shock. He didn't see a corporate enemy. He saw a ghost from a rainy night 7 years ago. Tiara didn't look away. She straightened her back and stared back at him with icy eyes, finally understanding that the war between them was much more than just business. It was personal. Tiara did not wait for the chairman to reach the balcony. She turned on her heel, her black silk gown snapping behind her like a shadow, and slipped through the glass doors. She needed air. She needed to put distance between herself and the man who was supposed to be a memory. The night air was cold, smelling of rain and expensive city exhaust, but it didn't cool the fire burning in her chest. She stood at the edge of the stone railing, her knuckles white as she gripped the cold banister. She heard the heavy, rhythmic click of dress shoes on the tiles behind her. She didn't have to look back to know who it was. The air around her suddenly felt heavy and charged with electricity, the way it had in that tiny apartment 7 years ago. "You're a hard woman to find, Angel," a low, gravelly voice whispered. Tiara closed her eyes for a second, then forced them open, turning slowly. Kang Lee stood only inches away. Up close, he was even more intimidating. He was taller than she remembered, his shoulders broader in his black suit. But his eyes were what caught her. They weren't the eyes of a businessman or a mafia boss. They were the eyes of a hungry man who had finally found what he was looking for. "Don't call me that," Tiara said, her voice steady and sharp as a razor. "My name is Miss Vane, and you are a man who is about to lose everything." Kang didn't flinch at her threat. Instead, he stepped closer, trapping her between his body and the railing. He didn't look at the phone in her hand or the high-tech watch she used to sync his stocks. He only looked at her face, his gaze tracing the lines of her jaw and the curve of her lips. A strange, softened expression crossed his face, a look of obsession that made her heart skip a beat against her will. "I don't care about the stocks," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous shimmer. "I don't care about the money. I spent 7 years and billions of dollars searching for a girl who vanished in the rain."
I thought you were dead. I thought the fire took you.
The fire you started? You sent me a gold dragon and then you sent the devil to burn my father alive. You destroyed my life, Kang Lee.
"I thought you were dead. I thought the fire took you." "The fire you started?" Tiara spat, her eyes filling with tears of rage. "You sent me a gold dragon, and then you sent the devil to burn my father alive. You destroyed my life, Kang Lee." Kang's jaw tightened, a flash of genuine confusion and pain crossing his dark eyes. He reached out, his gloved hand hovering near her cheek, but not quite touching it. He looked at her like she still belonged to him, like the 7 years of silence had never happened. "You're looking at me with murder in your eyes, Angel," he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't send the fire. I sent the crest so you would always have a way to find me. I wanted to protect you, not destroy you." Tiara laughed, a cold, broken sound. You're a liar. You're the chairman. Everything you touch turns to ash." She went to push past him, but he blocked her path, his presence overwhelming. For a moment, they were just two people on a balcony, the savior and the monster, bound by a debt that was covered in blood. Tiara wanted to hate him, but as he looked at her with that desperate, searching gaze, she realized the war was only just beginning. Tiara did not back down. She reached into her small evening bag and pulled out the one thing she had carried across the ocean and back. It was the gold dragon crest, now worn at the edges but still shining under the balcony lights. She held it up between them like a shield. "You say you wanted to protect me." Tiara's voice trembled with a mix of anger and old pain. "Then explain this. I found this in the smoking ruins of my home. My father was inside. Everything I loved was turned to ash because of this mark. You didn't send a gift, Kang Lee. You sent a target." Kang reached out, his fingers brushing the cool metal of the crest. As he looked at the golden dragon, his face went pale. His eyes widened, and for a moment the powerful chairman looked like he had been struck. He didn't look at Tiara with obsession anymore. He looked at the crest with pure horror. "This isn't mine," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Don't lie to me," Tiara shouted, tears finally spilling over. "It has your family name on the back. It belongs to the Kang Corporation." "It belongs to the family, yes," Kang said, his gaze fixed on the dragon. "But look at the tail, Tiara. Look at the small notch in the wing." He turned the crest over in the light. "I give my personal items a smooth finish. This one is different. This belonged to my uncle, the man who tried to kill me in that alley 7 years ago." The silence that followed was heavier than the city mist. Tiara felt the world spinning. She looked from the crest to Kang's face. He looked devastated, his shoulders sagging as if a great weight had just dropped on him. "He didn't just try to kill me," Kang continued, his voice low and hollow. "He must have followed me. When he saw you save me, he realized you were the only witness who could prove he was the traitor. He didn't burn your house to punish you. He did it to finish his job. He used my name and my symbol so that if you survived, you would hate me instead of him." Tiara felt a cold chill that had nothing to do with the night air. For 7 years, she had built her entire life around hating the man standing in front of her. She had become the ghost to destroy the person she thought was a monster. But the real monster was still out there, hiding in the shadows of the Kang family, watching them both. Kang looked at her, his eyes filled with a deep, aching sadness. "I spent 7 years searching for you because I loved the girl who saved me. I never knew my own blood had used my life to destroy yours." Tiara looked at the gold dragon in her hand. It wasn't a debt of love or a mark of revenge anymore. It was a clue to a much bigger crime. The rage in her heart didn't go away, but it shifted. She looked at Kang Lee, and for the first time since the night in the alley, she didn't see a billionaire or a killer. She saw another victim of the same fire. The war was not over, but the enemy had finally changed. The cold wind of the balcony felt different now. It was no longer a wall between them, but a shared breath. Tiara looked at the gold crest in her hand, then up at Kang. The man she had spent 7 years trying to destroy was standing there with a broken expression. He wasn't the monster she had imagined. He was a man who had been haunted by the same ghost as her. "My uncle," Kang said, his voice stronger now, though still filled with a dark edge. "He has always been in the shadows. He wanted the chairman's seat, and he knew I was the only thing in his way. When I disappeared that night 7 years ago, he thought he had won, but then he found out someone had saved me." Tiara nodded slowly, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. He didn't just want to kill a witness. He wanted to make sure that if you ever found out about me, you would find a grave instead of a girl. He wanted to keep us apart by using the fire. And it worked, Kang said, stepping closer. He didn't try to trap her this time. He stood beside her, looking out at the city they both wanted to conquer. For 7 years, I looked for you to thank you. For 7 years, you looked for me to kill me. We were both doing exactly what he wanted. We were wasting our time fighting each other while he grew stronger. Tiara felt a new kind of energy humming in her veins. It wasn't the lonely, cold rage of the ghost. It was something sharper. It was the feeling of a partner. She looked at the red button on her phone, the one that would have ruined Kang's bank accounts. She slowly turned the screen off and tucked the phone away. I have spent 7 years learning how to break empires, Tiara said, her voice calm and deadly. I have more information on your uncle's secret deals than even you do. I was going to use them to sink the Kang name, but now I think I'll use them to sink him. Kang turned to face her, a small, grim smile touching his lips. It wasn't his usual cold mask. It was the look of a predator who had just found a perfect ally. He held out his hand, palm up. He took your father, Kang said. He tried to take my life. He thinks he is untouchable because he owns the shadows. Let's show him that the shadows belong to us now. Tiara didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his. His grip was firm and warm, a silent promise that the war had moved from the balcony to the boardroom. They weren't just a savior and a stranger anymore. They were two people who had survived the same fire, and now they were going to make sure the man who started it burned in his own flames. The enemy of my enemy is my friend, Tiara whispered. No, replied Kang, his eyes locked on hers. In this city, the enemy of our enemy is a dead man. Let's go to work, Tiara. The penthouse office was quiet, except for the soft clicking of Tiara's keyboard. She sat at a wide glass desk, her face glowing from the light of 3 different computer screens. 7 years of training had led to this moment. She wasn't just a girl hiding in an apartment anymore. She was the person holding the keys to a kingdom. Across the room, Kang Lee stood by the window, speaking into a secure phone in a low, cold voice. He was moving his men like pieces on a chessboard, making sure his uncle had nowhere left to run. I found it, Tiara whispered, her eyes tracking lines of green code. He's been hiding money in offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. He was planning to empty the company's main vault tonight and flee the country. Kang turned, his eyes dark and focused. Can you stop him? Tiara's lips curved into a sharp, confident smile. I can do more than stop him. I'm locking his accounts one by one. By the time he tries to log in, his balance will be 0. I'm also sending all the proof of his illegal deals to the international banks. He won't just be broke, he'll be a wanted man in every country on Earth. As her fingers flew across the keys, she felt a strange sense of peace. This was the justice she had dreamed of while sitting in that lonely New York apartment. She wasn't using a gun or a torch. She was using her mind to tear down the man who had ruined her life. With one final heavy tap on the Enter key, the screen flashed a bright blue message. Access denied. Funds frozen. The money is gone, Tiara said, leaning back. He's trapped. Kang nodded, his jaw tight. Good. My men just reached the docks. My uncle is trying to board a private cargo ship, thinking his getaway is paid for. He doesn't know he's walking into a cage. He walked over to Tiara, placing a hand on the back of her chair. For a second, the coldness of the mission faded. They were two people who had finally finished a long, painful journey. Kang looked at the screen, then back at her. He saw the strength in her eyes, the brilliance that had allowed her to survive and thrive. He realized that while he had been ruling through fear, she had learned to rule through pure skill. He thought you were a weakness I would never find. He didn't realize you were the greatest power I could ever have by my side. Tiara looked at her hands. They were steady now. The fire from 7 years ago was finally being put out, replaced by a new solid foundation. The corporate execution is complete, Tiara said. The ghost has done her job. And the chairman is about to do his, Kang replied. He grabbed his coat, his expression turning back into the ruthless leader the city feared. Wait for me here, Tiara. When I come back, the name Kang will finally mean something we can be proud of. Tiara watched him leave, the door clicking shut with a heavy sound. She turned back to her monitors, watching the red dots that represented the uncle's failing power vanish one by one. The hunt was almost over, and for the first time, she could see the light of a new day beginning. The storm had finally passed. The morning sun began to peek through the tall glass windows of the Kang Tower, casting long golden streaks across the floor. Down at the city docks, the police had already taken the uncle away in handcuffs. Without his money and with his secrets revealed to the world, he had no more shadows to hide in. The man who had started the fire was finally facing a cold cell, and the debt that had haunted Tiara for 7 years was paid in full. Inside the quiet office, Tiara stood by the desk, looking at the city below. She felt lighter than she had in years. The heavy weight of revenge that she had carried across the ocean was gone, replaced by a strange, peaceful calm. She was no longer just the ghost looking for a fight. She was a woman who had taken back her power. Kang Lee walked into the room, his footsteps slow and steady. He had changed out of his torn suit into a fresh one, looking every bit like the king of his empire once again. But as he looked at Tiara, his expression was not cold or ruthless. It was filled with a deep, quiet respect. He walked over to the massive mahogany desk and pulled out a second leather chair, placing it right next to his own. "The uncle is gone," Kang said, his voice low and sincere. "The board of directors is in shock, and the world is waiting to see what happens next to the Kang Corporation. They think I'm going to rule alone, just like my father did." He paused, looking at the two chairs sitting side by side. "But I don't want to rule alone. I realized tonight that I don't need a savior, and I don't need a ghost. I need a partner who is just as brilliant and brave as the girl I met in the rain." He gestured to the empty seat next to his.
This seat has stayed empty for a long time. I want you to take it, Tiara.
"This seat has stayed empty for a long time. I want you to take it, Tiara. I want us to build a new dynasty together. Not one built on lies and fire, but one built on the strength we found when we stopped fighting each other." Tiara looked at the chair, then at the man who had once been her greatest enemy. She thought about her father and the kindness he had taught her. She thought about the 7 years she had spent forging herself into a weapon. She realized that she didn't have to choose between being kind and being powerful. She could be both. She walked forward and ran her hand over the back of the chair. It was a seat of power, a place where she could make sure no other families ever had to suffer the way hers did. She looked up at Kang and saw the promise in his eyes. He wasn't looking at her like she belonged to him anymore. He was looking at her like she was his equal.
I didn't come here to be a queen. I came here to change the world.
Then let's start today.
"I didn't come here to be a queen," Tiara said with a small, confident smile. "I came here to change the world." "Then let's start today," Kang replied. Tiara sat down, the leather cool and firm beneath her. As Kang sat beside her, they both looked out at the waking city. The old ways were over. and a new era had begun. The dragon and the ghost were gone, replaced by two leaders who knew exactly what it cost to reach the top. Together, they were untouchable. The sun was setting over Seoul, turning the sky into a beautiful mix of orange and purple. Tiara stood on the private balcony of the Kang Tower, the wind gently blowing her hair. Behind her, the office was quiet. The phones had stopped ringing, and the long day of meetings was finally over. She looked out at the city, no longer seeing it as a place of shadows and secrets, but as a place she helped lead. She heard a soft step behind her. Kang Lee walked out onto the balcony, his expression calm and relaxed. He wasn't the cold, scary chairman that the world knew. To Tiara, he was simply the man who had stood by her side when the world was falling apart. He didn't say anything at first. He just stood next to her, enjoying the quiet moment. "I have something for you," Kang said, reaching into his pocket. He held out a small velvet box. Tiara opened it, and her breath caught in her throat. Inside was a new crest. It was shaped like the same soaring dragon from 7 years ago, but it was different. Instead of plain gold, it was encrusted with tiny, brilliant diamonds that caught the fading sunlight. It sparkled with a light that was almost blinding. "The old crest was a mark of a debt," Kang whispered, his voice warm. "This one is a mark of our future. It represents a dynasty that isn't built on fire, but on light." Tiara took the crest out of the box. It felt heavy and solid in her hand. She remembered the night in the rain when she had first saved him. She remembered the night of the fire when she had lost everything. For so long she had wanted to run away from the name Kang. She had wanted to walk away and never look back. But as she looked at the man beside her and the sparkling dragon in her palm, she realized she didn't want to leave. She had fought hard to get here. She had turned herself into a weapon to find the truth, and now the truth had set her free. She wasn't a victim anymore, and she wasn't a ghost. She was a ruler. "I'm not going anywhere," Tiara said, her voice firm and sure. She pinned the diamond crest to her suit, right over her heart. Kang smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. He reached out and took her hand, his fingers locking with hers. They stood there together, two people who had survived the dark and found their way into the light. 7 years ago, Tiara had saved a stranger's life and lost her world. Today, she had saved an empire and found a new one. She didn't walk away this time. She stayed to rule. And as the stars began to shine over Seoul, the city knew that its new queen had finally arrived.